Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the session on symbolic expression, we have with us Ms. Manisha, who is going to translate the lecture into sign language. The topic of discussion for today is elements of culture. We try to understand what constitute culture, what are the different components of culture, and this will help us to understand that culture is not only parts, it's kind of a relation between the parts and whole. So culture is a shared characteristic of a group of people which encompasses place of birth, religion, language and social behavior. It includes norms, values, customs, symbols and even literature, music, folkways. So it's a whole gamut of things that fall into culture. Elements of culture implies the essential ingredient that together constitute a full-fledged culture. So if we were to understand, say, the culture of India or the culture of a particular society, we need to understand a number of components or elements to get a holistic view. So the basic elements of culture are, there is no fixed understanding. Some say there could be 7 elements, some say 9, but these are the basic elements. So symbols, language, values, norms, which includes both mores and folkways, beliefs, sanctions and artifacts. Now let us look at each of these elements of culture. Number 1 is the sanctions. Now when we look into the term sanction, it implies certain behavior giving the support, approval or permission, or by instilling formal action of disapproval and non-support. So in the context of culture, it implies certain behaviors which are approved by society and you are kind of allowed to behave in certain manner. So it's a kind of a control, it's a form of social control and it leads to kind of encourage individual to conform to cultural norm. Now through sanction, there will be social order, else every individual will follow their own way of behaving. In order to have certain kind of collectively accepted values, norms and behavior, sanctions are imposed. Now when we talk about sanctions, it implies that individual have to conform to norms in anticipation or expectations of positive sanctions. What are positive sanctions? Positive sanctions are award, in the form of an award. So if you do well in your study, you are awarded good grades. So the idea is that the accepted behavior is to do well in the study. So it also includes certain kind of symbolic behavior. So a child who gets good grades are appraised by parents, teachers and even friends. Now there could be a negative sanction. When does negative sanction come? It comes when you break a norm. So the breaking of norms leads to cultural sanctions such as earning negative level or even legal sanctions such as traffic tickets, fines or imprisonment. Many a time they are informal sanctions, negative punishment which could kind of cut you from the society. So if you do something which is against the norm of the society, you would be excommunicated. So that is a negative sanction. The second element are norms. Now what are norms? Norms are basically guidelines. They are how to behave in accordance with what a society has defined as good, right and important. And most members of the society, they adhere to that norm. So it kind of tells you that these are the way in which you are expected to behave. So in a patriarchal society, women are supposed to behave in certain manners that would display the hierarchy of men. So once you don't follow that norm, then you are kind of deviating from the accepted. Now norms are kind of established through written rules, or it could also be through certain accepted legitimate behavior which passes from one generation to other. When we talk about written rules, then it becomes formal norms. Now these written rules are basically behaviors expected from the individual, and these norms are arrived through written agreement. It is kind of collectively agreed upon in order to serve or suit the majority of the people. Now formal rules are more specific and clearly stated out of the various types of norms. There are informal norms as well. Now informal norms are not so strictly implied, but it is kind of informally or through unwritten rules, certain kind of accepted behavior. So that is more in terms of oral kind of a thing. Now when we talk about norms, we say they are formal norms. Now the formal norms are kind of considered as mores, M-O-R-E-S, and these are the moral views and principle of a group. Now violating a formal norm or a more can have serious consequences because they are more kind of legitimate symbolic expression of the society. So it is not easy to move out of it. The strongest mores are the legally protected with laws or other formal norms. So one of the formal norms that we could see could be the norm of heterosexuality. Now because there is the norm of heterosexuality, homosexuality kind of becomes legally unwanted or legally kind of not accepted, and there could be laws which could be used to punish people who are moving towards that direction. So now the formal norms can also be critiqued and questioned, and therefore certain mores which have been there for a period of time needs to change. The law has to change. So there is a need to revise or revisit the laws on homosexuality because the norms are changing. Mores are judged and guarded by public sentiment. So public sentiment is basically an informal norm, but then it helps you to evaluate the norm of the society. If it is good, the majority would kind of give support to that sentiment. If it is not good for the society, it could give in an negative sanction. People who violate mores are seen as with negative label. They could be labeled as shameful or certain terms which could kind of give them an inferior status in society. They can even be shunned or banned from some groups. Now when we talk about the informal norms, they are referred as folkways. Now folkways are unwritten, they are kind of oral, and these are without any moral underpinning. So it is not kind of out to behave, it's kind of not mandatory for people, but it could be a choice is there. So folkways direct appropriate behavior in the day-to-day practice and expression of a culture. They specify whether to wear a tie and a blazer or a t-shirt and a sandal to an event. So folkways could be also a particular way of dressing. Say we all know that a certain culture there is a dress code, so that could be kind of an informal. It's not necessary that every member wears it, but it is kind of something which is accepted as a informal dress of the society. Folkways might be small manners learned by observation and imitation, but they are not trivial. It's not something which is kind of less important to a society. They are as important as mores, but it is just that they are unwritten and there are no kind of legal sanctions to ensure its acceptance. Like mores and laws, these informal norms, that is folkways, help people negotiate their daily life with a given culture. So the folkway becomes an concern or symbolic of the identity of a particular society. So we know that many cultures are known by their particular dress code. So that kind of gives a unique identity to that particular society. The third element of culture are symbols. Now symbols are gestures, signs, objects, signals and words. It could be kind of both verbal gesture and non-verbal gesture. Symbols are kind of certain meanings attached to a particular object, particular way of behaving or anything. So it is kind of behaving in a particular manner and the accepted meaning is understood by everybody. So what it helps us to do is, it provides clue to understand experience. They convey recognizable meaning that are shared by society. So it is kind of certain non-verbal gesture. For instance, when we shake hand, it is a gesture of friendship. When we bow down to touch the feet of an elder, it is a symbol of respect. It is a symbol of taking blessings from your seniors. So symbols are highly functional. They could be also stop signs. For instance, it provides you useful instructions. So here we know there are certain symbols in, say, traffic signals, or there are certain symbols in your stations or schools. They tell us certain accepted behavior. If it's kind of red, you stop the vehicle. It says no crossing, so you don't cross that road. So as physical object, they belong to the material culture. But because they function as symbol, they are also part of non-material culture. So symbols are only valuable in what they represent. So it is also relative. So certain object becomes valuable because a certain meaning is attached to it. For instance, if we give the gun, which is a weapon, to the person who is kind of do a murder, then it becomes something that will call for punishment. So it is not valuable. But if we give the same weapon in the hand of a soldier, it becomes valuable. It becomes symbolic of nationalism. It becomes symbolic of protection. So the meanings of symbols changes with context. There are a lot of examples: trophies, blue ribbon, gold medal. So they kind of not necessarily having the same meaning, but it will reflect certain amount of accomplishment, award for certain actions. Symbols are also found in the form of verbal gesture. So that is, you kind of have to necessarily speak or say certain words. So when you meet someone, you greet the person, and that conveys a meaning that you are going to start a certain conversation or a meeting. When you go to a place of worship, you utter certain words, certain gesture like folding hands, which is kind of conveying the meaning that you are going to worship at that point of time. The fourth element of culture is language. Now language is very important because language is a key symbol of any culture. How does it differentiate between the animal world and the human world is the availability of language among humans who could then communicate, and communication helps to share the culture. So language is symbolic system through which people communicate and through which culture is transmitted. So if there was no language, then culture would not have spread even within the society or between society. Some language contain a system of symbol used for written communication, while other rely on spoken communication and non-verbal action. Societies often share a single language, and many languages contain the same basic elements. Language is crucial for communication. An alphabet is written system made of symbolic shapes that refer to spoken word sound. So we know the alphabet changes from the language to language. Now for anybody who does not have an understanding of that alphabet, it will be like a symbol. It is only meaningful for people who have learned that language. So it is kind of simple words. Language are symbols that convey specific meaning to a specific group or society. Now children learn language from their culture. Just as they learn about the symbols, gestures, they also learn language. So we've seen children learning language without having to tutor them. In their everyday growing up, they learn language on their own. Humans have a capacity for language that no other animal species possess. Our capacity for language in turn helps make a culture complex. The next element of culture are norms. Norms as elements of culture are rules and guidelines which specify the behavior of an individual. Norms keep a person within the boundary of society and its culture. So basically it's a form of social control, helps the society to maintain a social order. It gives restriction about something which should not be done in a particular time and a particular space. It enables to socialize individual according to the accepted values, beliefs and behavior of that particular culture. It helps us to differentiate between two forms of norms. One is formal, that is mores, and the second is folkways, which is informal. Now mores are more in terms of moral guidelines. They are kind of accepted norms, pattern of behavior. They are more serious, but the folkways are informal, but both are equally important. The next element of culture are rituals. Now rituals are very important in the understanding of society because it refers to religion. Religion is an important constituent of society. Just as we understand economy, understand politics, religion becomes crucial. Every society has some form or ritual or the other. Now what are rituals? Rituals are certain established procedures, certain ceremonies, certain actions which often mark a transition in the life course. So rituals are basically sacred moments and it helps us to transit from one moment of life to the other. So it has been referred by Van Genet as rites of passage. Rituals are basically cultural universal. Some form of rituals are found in every society. So it reflects as well as transmits cultural norm and other element from one generation to the other. There are n number of examples of rituals. both from a religious perspective, that is when we kind of would go to the temple or to the mosque in the morning and perform certain action, whereas rituals are part of the secular domain also. So the example of rituals in secular domain would be the graduation ceremony in colleges or university. It is kind of a time honored ritual. So we know it is an appreciation of the work done by certain students and having been successfully completing a task assigned to them. Many society, rituals help signify one's gender identity. So we know in many society, they are ritual associated with the growing up of girls. So when the girl matures and her life changes, that is, she becomes capable of fertility, menstruation starts, rituals are organized, and these ritual or ceremonies mark a transition from a young carefree girl to a girl who would be then assigned responsibility of reproduction. Values are also important element of culture, and it involves judgment of what is good or bad and desirable. Values are good ideas and thinking of a person. So the origin of value is not necessarily biological, it is social. So every society develops certain value over a period of time. And how is it developed? There are certain important things that the society thinks are significant. So in Japan, for example, the central value is harmony. So they don't want any kind of conflict, they want social harmony, and it is kind of accepted that everybody should avoid engaging in violence and conflict. Now if we look into the difference between values and norms, values are overarching principle that determine what is good or bad. It is a criteria for evaluation, whereas norms are specific behavioral standards that are prescriptive. Second difference is values are beliefs that are regarded as important. It differentiates between right and wrong, whereas norms are expectations. They are guiding principle. Defines cultural values of a society. So example of values are honesty, respect, responsibility, whereas norms could be folkways, mores, customs and laws. So when we look into these elements of culture, we have a good understanding of how a society is structured or organized by certain material and non-material elements of culture. Norms, values, beliefs are all part of non-material culture. The material culture would be artifacts, religious institutions, education, politics. These are all part of material culture. So artifact or material object would be constituting the material culture of a society. And a cultural artifact is any item which contains important information of that society. Cultural artifacts are found in all society. So by looking into the different elements of culture, we have a good understanding of how society are regulated and order is maintained. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.